Hi everybody and welcome to the Kidney Coach YouTube channel. I am Fiona, qualified naturopath, and I am joined today by the beautiful Emily Cahill, who is also a qualified naturopath and registered nurse. Emily has a special interest in people with kidney disease. She's a very valid member of our Kidney Coach community. If you head over to www.kidneycoach.com, you will see and hit articles. You'll see Emily's beautiful face there. She's written the majority of, or she's written all of the latest blog posts that go up there. While Duncan and I are busy making sure Kaigenesis and formulating new and exciting supplements, so stay tuned for that. You also may have come across, you may have answered one of your Facebook questions or answered an email if you've sent us any emails or posted on our Facebook page. So something that Emily and I, wanted to talk to you about today was the link between the gut and the kidneys. And it's something, you know, in modern medicine now, that medicine is starting to catch up, that there's this massive link between the gut and the brain. We talk about the gut-brain axis and how changes to our microbiome, which is the flora that inhabits our gut, and how important that is for our immune function, but also brain health and neurotransmitters and all of those sort of things. But what a lot of people don't know is there's a massive link between our kidney health and kidney function and our microbiome. And that's what we wanted to go over today. And especially in the early stages of kidney disease, or if there's a family history of even just cardiovascular disease or diabetes, all those things that we know that make you more prone to getting chronic kidney disease. There's a whole pile of things that you can do by looking after your microbiome and gut health that long-term could prevent even getting the onset of kidney disease. And that's where, really, as naturopaths, we're probably the most passionate. Prevention is better than cure. And so today we want to talk about more of those sort of things that you can do very early on in early stages of kidney disease, and just things that you can do in general to support your microbiome and kidney health, and why there is a connection between the kidneys and the gut. So Emily, do you want to start there of what the actual link is between this microbiome that we've got going on in our gut, and how on earth does our microbes change and alter the function of our kidneys?
Yes, so our microbiome are all of the bacteria, fungi, viruses, parasites that live in our gut. So we've got, hundreds of thousands of them, and we sort of forget about them as they chug away and do their work. But, you know, as naturopaths, we've known for a really long time that really all health begins in the gut. And so what's happening in our gut has a massive effect on the rest of our body. And as we're sort of seeing more and more research come through, that idea is being understood more in sort of mainstream medicine as well. But particularly when we're talking about the connection between the gut and the kidneys, there's a couple of things that happen. So our microbes in our gut are responsible for breaking down the food that we eat. In that process of breaking down the food that we eat, they produce wastes, they produce toxins and things like that. And then these wastes and toxins have to get also cleared by the bloodstream. And so anything that's in the bloodstream needs to go through the kidneys to either get excreted or to get reabsorbed and to go back around the body. So what they've found is that there is quite a big link between the health of someone's gut microbiome and their the progression of kidney disease. So when I talk about the health of the gut microbiome, what does that mean? And, you know, we're getting a better understanding of certain bacteria and things like that in the gut that are healthful, but we don't have a full understanding of it yet. But basically, in terms of our gut microbiome, there are microbes that are seen as being contributing to health, and that there are microbes that can be causing problems with our health. So it depends on the balance, basically, the balance of what's living in your gut, and also the diversity of what's living in the gut. So more and more research is coming through that that diversity is the most important thing, as opposed to having specific bacteria living in your gut. Yeah, I don't know if I've even answered the question. I kind of went off on a tangent then.
No, it's all good. Keep going. And it was just really, why does the gut affect the kidneys? And you're talking about filtering and all of those sort of things. So if you've obviously got overgrowth and parasites and fungi, they're going to be coming and filtered through your kidneys, which is where the link will be.
Yeah, exactly. So, if we've got more of these unhealthy bacteria in our gut, then they're not as good at breaking down our food. So what we start to see is these things called uremic toxins. Certain bacteria in the gut are more likely to break things down into these uremic toxins, and part of it is the food that we eat as well. So certain foods are more likely to cause these toxins. But these toxins then enter our circulation and have to be filtered by the kidneys. So two things happen. One is it's putting extra load on the kidneys, so making them work harder. But the second being, if your kidneys aren't functioning very well, they're less able to filter these toxins. So we start to see higher levels of things like urea, which is something we can measure on a blood test. But there are other toxins as well that aren't measured in general tests, are more so looked at in research. But we start to see high levels of these other toxins, which then the buildup of those can start to cause some of the symptoms that we see, particularly in later stages of kidney disease. So itchy skin, nausea, loss of appetite, fatigue, even high blood pressure as well. And the other, link between the gut and the kidneys is that depending, again, on what's happening in your gut, it can increase the level of inflammation throughout the body. So again, if you've got an imbalance of bacteria in the gut, or depending on what you're eating, or if your gut is a bit leaky, then we start to get these inflammatory molecules increasing throughout the body, causing further damage. So both the inflammation and these toxins can also, have been seen to go on to affect scarring of the tissue of the kidneys, damage to the kidneys, which then further affects kidney function, which then, it kind of just rolls on and on.
Yeah, I've got a big note here, inflammation, if you didn't mention it, so you did. And obviously the microbiome is one of the things that manages systemic inflammatory levels in the body. So a healthy microbiome that's producing a lot of what we call short chain fatty acids is an anti-inflammatory sort of microbiome. And then if you've got overgrowth, they'll move towards pro-inflammatory production, as Emily mentioned. Then your kidneys have to filter that. And then the other thing I want to mention, there's a couple of genetic things, which is my thing as well, but also with leaky gut. So Emily mentioned this word leaky gut syndrome, which is something us naturopaths love. The gut lining should look nice and tight. There's something called tight gut junctions that sit in the gut, and they should be like this. And when you are highly stressed, a highly acidic diet, lots of meat, sugar, processed foods, gluten in certain genetic susceptible individuals, medications such as non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, and too much coffee, and antibiotics and alcohol, and my list gets longer and longer, they puncture holes into this nice gut lining. And the tight gut junctions that look like this start looking like this. And then, as Emily mentions, what happens in the gut then is you're absorbing into your bloodstream non-digested food particles. And so by the time that your kidneys have to filter all of that down, rather than having the short amino acid chains from your food, you've actually got big molecules coming through, and those molecules then have to get through all your nephrons to be filtered. And so we know that leaky gut will cause what we call a leaky brain. And I suspect, and there's not a lot of research done on this, but leaky gut syndrome, then you've got really big non-broken down particles that your immune system generally attacks, but then they've been filtered through the kidneys. And so your nephrons almost potentially have bigger molecules coming through to be filtered, which probably causes scarring, and then can contribute to kidney disease. And that process will take a lot longer than things that we see much faster from a leaky gut, but long term, and I suspect one of the reasons that we're seeing kidney disease coming on the rise is because of chronic long-term things like leaky gut syndrome and changes in the microbiome and everything else that we talk about in these videos of lifestyle and diet and smoking and high sugar and all of those sort of things. So the other thing I just wanted to mention, there's something called a CBS gene, and if people have mutations on the CBS gene, and then they have a microbiome change, they're more likely to increase ammonia production. And You can probably talk more to this, but my understanding is ammonia can be quite, because obviously that's being filtered through the kidneys, that can be quite detrimental to nephron health. And one of the things that sometimes people notice if they've got chronic changes to their microbiome, and it has to be pretty bad for you to get this, and you have to have this CBS gene mutation generally, is people's urine has and stool can get an ammonia type smell to it, like someone's poured bleach down the toilet, and that can sometimes be a flagger for me if people ever mention that they've got very strange smelling urine that's more that ammonia type, that there's some weird stuff going on with the microbiome. So sorry, Emily, just wanted to add that stuff in there. So all right, so we know now how the microbiome and the kidneys are connected. So now that we know that if we've got an imbalance in the microbiome, potentially that can, that's going to put a bigger load on our kidney function. What then are some of the things that, one, how do we test this stuff? How do we know when it's gotten to a point where we really need to do something about the kidneys? Walk me through, now that I have this knowledge, what would I do with it?
Yeah. So yes, you can test, you can do stool tests to look at the various different bacteria in the gut, the balance of bacteria in the gut, to, to, I guess, diagnose dysbiosis. That can also tell us exactly which species are in there, and, we know the functions of a lot of the different microbes. We certainly don't know all of them. There's a lot there that are still being discovered, but that can also give us a bit of an idea of what potentially could be happening because of the bacteria in your gut. But I kind of err on the side of most people these days have dysbiosis because of the food that we eat, because of stress levels, because of medications that we're taking. And then I guess in terms of kidney disease as well, we've got a few extra aspects from that, because often people are on, will be put on a low potassium diet. The generally speaking, the foods that are really good for feeding the good gut bacteria are our, fruit and vegetables, are our sort of, they're called sort of foods higher in prebiotics. Often in kidney disease, the motility of the gut slows down again, which then affects the balance of bacteria. Things like phosphate binders are going to affect the gut. So yes, you can test. That's definitely something you can do. But I'll often just sort of assume that somebody's got dysbiosis, and because we know that anything that we're going to do in terms of treating or improving it are going to have beneficial effects, not just in the gut, but throughout the rest of the body.
Yeah, hence why as naturopaths we're treat the gut first, and disease starts in the gut. And it's one of those things, if you see a naturopath and you've gone in for headaches and suddenly they've got you on a detox and doing stuff, that's where they're coming from. It's that change the microbiome, you change the entire biochemistry of the body. And obviously pH is very much regulated by your microbiome. So even though we can do alkaline diets, if you've got certain types of, bacteria in the gut, especially the methane producers and things like that, they'll bump up stool pH, and then that has an effect on everything as well. So, okay, so let's say I'm dysbiotic. I've got a family history of cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and my eGFR, it's not too bad, but, it should be in an eGFR. We want it over 90, and it's come back and it's sitting at 74. No one's flagged me about anything. What advice would you give to someone like that?
Wow. Okay. So I guess I would probably start with looking at things like diet and lifestyle. Then, trying to get a better understanding. Obviously, everyone's different in terms of symptoms, but things like the food that they're eating, what they've been exposed to, any medications they're on, to I guess, in my mind, get a bit of an idea of what's going on in terms of their gut. But I think that as a starting point, as Fiona said, treating the gut is often a really good place to start because it has such a widespread effect on all of the different systems in the body. So if someone's got issues with cardiovascular health and diabetes, and maybe their kidneys aren't working very well, one area that is going to be affecting all three is going to be someone's gut health. So, you know, and I guess then the question is, well, what do we do if someone has dysbiosis or an imbalance of bacteria? And part of it is, I guess the most important part actually is about the food that you eat, because it's the food that you eat that are feeding the bacteria in the gut. So, for example, we have bacteria that, I guess, feed on protein. We have bacteria that feed on vegetables, and we have bacteria that can do both. Generally speaking, the bacteria who feed on protein are the ones who are going to be making more of those inflammatory type molecules. So if we're eating a lot of protein, we're bolstering, I guess, those particular microbes in the gut. If we're eating more fruit and vegetables, we're more likely to have more of those healthful type bacteria in the gut. And also, what they eat depends on things like production of short chain fatty acids or production of uremic toxins. So uremic toxins are from the breakdown of protein. Whereas if we are having more foods that are high in fiber, that have more of our prebiotic properties, then they're going to be creating more of our short chain fatty acids, which are our anti-inflammatory type molecules. The thing with the gut is that in order to change the balance of bacteria in the gut, which you can absolutely do, and it can actually happen quite quickly, it's about what you're eating. So that is how you change the balance of bacteria in the gut, unless you go and have a fecal microbiome transplant. That's another way to do it. But generally speaking, it's the foods that you're eating that are going to do that.
So, and I wonder, you know, like looking at all the studies that I have on the microbiome for healthy bacteria has a preference towards, as you mentioned, fruit, vegetable, fiber. And I'm trying to think if I take you down this rabbit hole or not. I won't go there right now. I was going to ask you about the carnivore diet, because I know people had commented on a previous post we did about that and how that works. But let's stick with what we know in kidney disease, and that is a higher fruit and vegetable diet. People do better. It's more alkalizing. And we've seen benefits of carnivore diet, and I don't know whether that's something I need to look at research about kidneys and microbiome, because that does work for people too. But let's say that what we know works for the general population is this more high fruit vegetable, a lot less animal protein because of the way it changes. Now, obviously, we recommend that in our kidney disease solution program. And we know that really, people sometimes just are implementing dietary stuff and getting really amazing results and changes. Do you think in part the reason that people's kidney function improves is because they're changing their microbiome by having so much more soluble fiber and things that will feed this, the right types of microbiome? Do you think that's in part why a simple dietary change of more fruit and vegetable and a lot less protein and processed foods has such a massive impact on people with kidney disease?
Yeah, I think that's definitely a part of it. You know, it's going to be taking a massive load off the kidneys, and you know, reducing inflammation in the body, all of those things that we know drive on kidney damage. So yeah, I think, you know, that's interesting. And I guess, you know, when we look at the studies saying that people have a higher amount of potassium in their diet have better outcomes in kidney disease, is that because it's actually what's going on with the microbiome as opposed to being about, you know, one particular nutrient? Yeah, I think that you probably find that it's a big part of it.
Yeah, and it's funny, we always look at things in isolation, and if you're listening and tuning in for the first time and you've heard Emily say that people that eat more potassium have better long-term outcomes with kidney disease, and you're scratching your head thinking that's the complete opposite of what my nephrologist told me, please make sure you go back and watch our video on potassium, because everything you've been told about low potassium in kidney disease potentially is incorrect. What Emily's referring to is that we now know and the new studies are suggesting that unless your potassium is elevated on a blood test, and only then, and that your blood test was done properly, if you're clenching your wrist and you've got a tourniquet on there, you're going to automatically have your potassium levels bumped up in a blood test. So unless you've had a proper blood test done without all the things that we know bumps up potassium, unless you've got elevated potassium, by cutting out those foods, you actually worsen your long-term outcome of kidney disease. Something that Emily and I come across all the time, and it's both of our pet peeves when we're talking to renal dietitians and things like that, is they're not looking at the latest research. And this is the latest research coming out. We're not making this up. There's been some really good studies on this, same with magnesium. And of course, everybody's told to take this stuff out. And interestingly, as you said, when people are put on low potassium, low phosphorus diet and low magnesium, they're cutting out the bulk of their fruits and vegetables. And of course, they're the foods that you need for a healthy microbiome. Healthy microbiome means less inflammation. And what's driving long-term chronic kidney disease? Inflammation and damage to the nephrons, so and the scarring of that tissue. So quite potentially everything that we know about kidney disease, when we look at things in such a narrow, compartmentalized way, is the wrong way of looking at things. And we're not taking into account the link between the gut, the kidneys, and all of those sort of things. So, okay, so we know a diet with a wide variety of fruits and vegetables and things like that are super useful. I want to touch on oxalates, only because the microbiome has a lot to do with that, and people that are prone to kidney stones. And definitely sometimes I do see people with these oxalate issues, and of course the microbiome, especially if you've got an overgrowth of fungi, being in particular Candida, will upregulate oxalate levels. Is there anything you want to say to that? That's just something people will ask me about, high vegetables and oxalate levels. Any comment you about that one?
Yeah, I think if someone has high oxalate levels, it's generally because of the bacteria in their gut. So yes, eating high oxalate foods for someone who already has that propensity can increase oxalate levels, but it's not just from eating foods that are high in oxalates. It's actually what's going on with your gut bacteria, and that's what you need to address. As opposed to, oh, well, the answer is just to cut out those foods because there's something else going on.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. It's so right. And it's generally, we know from organic acid testing that oxalates will generally be bumped up by an overgrowth of Candida, which is a fungus, a very opportunistic one that I would say, I don't know, 70% of the population have. I mean, you'll have it in your gut, but lots of people have an overgrowth of it. And it has a huge impact on your immune system and the way that you basically are able to absorb oxalates and things like that. So talking to someone about potential Candida overgrowth, and if you've had more than 2 or 3 rounds of antibiotics, even if it was in your childhood, you're likely to have a Candida overgrowth. Candida will also sit along, and actually a video that I would love to do with you, Emily, is to talk about heavy metals, but Candida overgrowth and heavy metals go together. There seems to be some protective role that Candida plays, and until you chelate and remove the heavy metals, only then will the Candida levels go down. But I often see high oxalates in people with unresolved heavy metal issues, and then they've got an overgrowth of Candida, which seems to be protecting them from the heavy metal exposure. And so you have to address those in that certain order. Okay, so we've got the right diet. And we've spoken about microbiome diversity being the big thing. And what I want to come now to, because people are going to be like, okay, well, I can do that, but should I take probiotics? And I guess I want to address the approach that the natural therapy industry has taken to probiotics, which is, here's some lactobacillus and some bifidus, which we know the most about and is studied, and we'll make all our capsules full of that and take that. And of course, that doesn't take, lactobacillus is such a minute part of what's in our gut. It's not even one of the main ones, really. Same with bifidus, so what do we do when people are like, well, I've been on antibiotics, maybe I should take a probiotic? What's your recommendations like that? Are prebiotics better? Why do supplement companies just focus on these 1 or 2? Let's talk about that.
Yeah, so probiotics can be useful, but I think the biggest thing to know about probiotics, and I remember, I don't think I learned this at uni, I think it was after uni, and I was very disappointed when I found out, is that they don't colonize the gut.
No.
So what I mean by that is that, yeah, exactly. So just, like if you take say a lactobacillus probiotic, it doesn't mean that all of a sudden they're going to set up shop in your gut and grow. That's not how it works. They have a function and an action as they move through your gut, but it's not about colonizing. Certain probiotics can help to increase the growth of different microbes. So there is a little bit of a correlation there, but generally speaking, I'm using probiotics for different functions. So not for changing the gut microbiome. I'm using prebiotics to do that, to help with the gut microbiome. But probiotics I'm using for specific effects. So, you know, and I guess the other thing about probiotics to know is that specific probiotics have specific effects. So all lactobacillus doesn't do the same thing. And you've actually got to break it down even to a greater degree than that. So when you're looking to take a probiotic, it's really important to know what you're taking, but to know, is this probiotic that I'm taking, this strain that I'm taking, does it actually have evidence or research for what I want it to do? Because probiotics act very differently. So I guess that's one of my big things about probiotics, is that they have different functions, just like different, say, I don't know, herbs have different functions. So different probiotics do different strains of probiotics, and we need to get specific all the way to the strain for it to have the effect of whatever the reason is that you're taking it. It's not good enough to just go and get a probiotic and assume they're all going to do the same thing.
Yeah, it's, again, really great that you mentioned that. And it's one of my things as well, that people are like, oh yeah, I've been on a probiotic. And I'm like, yeah, that just, like you say, it only works as you take it. So is there, with that then, let's go and talk about prebiotics, because you mentioned them. What is a prebiotic? And is that something that will help colonize the right gut, as long as you're doing the right diet along with it? And how do prebiotics work? And are there prebiotic foods potentially that people could be incorporating into their diet that will help with this microbiome diversity?
Yeah. So prebiotics I sort of describe as fertilizer for the gut. So they're the things that actually help with the growth of your gut bacteria. So yes, there are a lot of foods that are classed as prebiotics, and it's generally the resistant starch part of food. So it's the fiber, it's the part that doesn't get fully broken down, that I guess your bacteria feed on, sort of as a way of explaining it. Yeah. You can take prebiotic supplements. You know, there are a number out there. And then in terms of foods, I guess some of our better prebiotic type foods are things like onion, garlic, artichoke, leek, asparagus, all of your different greens, even berries, flax seeds. So really, you know, I'm talking about a lot of your fiber and fruit and vegetables. Legumes as well will have various different prebiotics in them. So they're what we use to grow the good bacteria. Now, the other part of it is, and maybe I'm taking us down a rabbit hole if I go here, there is only so much room in the gut.
Yeah.
Okay. So if we have an overgrowth of, let's call them bad bacteria, because unhealthy, bad, you know, whatever bacteria, we need to deal with that somehow in order to grow more good bacteria as well. So that's why the balance is so important, because if you've got too much bad, there's not enough room for the good. So sometimes with some clients, we need to do some work on getting rid of and making space in the gut so that we can increase the growth of the good bacteria. In some cases, but in saying that, if you do change your diet over time, that will help with increasing the growth of the good bacteria, which then means, you know, works the opposite way. There's not as much room for the bad or the unhealthy bacteria as well. So, I mean, I definitely prefer to use food as prebiotic where I can. Yes, you can take prebiotic supplements, and then sometimes you'll also find supplements that have prebiotics and probiotics in them. But yeah, I find food to be kind of the best way to do that.
Yeah, I agree. I really like green banana flour, sweet potato, and you can use, I'm not a big fan of the white rice where you cook it, cool it and heat it up again, only because grains are quite pro-inflammatory for most people. So I tend to do it through the sweet potato, and the green banana flour is great though. If you want some nice weekend pancakes, you can use your green banana flour, and that is very high in what we call, Emily was talking about, resistant starch, and that is very good for flourishing and helping the microbiome to grow. And then using things like kimchi, sauerkraut, all of those sort of things are, they're not prebiotic, they're actually probiotic type foods, but then you can get this probiotic foods if you're eating them regularly, which helps with all of that as well. And to your point, you're right. If you've got someone whose stool test has come back, or we know that they're dysbiotic, the first thing is basically it's like gardening, you weed. So we'd use herbs that would weed that out, and then you seed. So you put prebiotics in there to help, it sprout again, and then you basically help support the gut with a really healthy ongoing diet. And the microbiome, as you mentioned, changes quickly. Like I think I read a study where someone can get their microbiome going really nicely, and we can see that from tests. They've got this nice diversity, and that they've got the pH is right, and they've, their secretory IgA is all looking healthy and all these good things. And then they get a little bit stressed and have a couple of glasses of alcohol, and poof, the microbiome's gone out again, and it takes a little bit to get it back again. So just knowing that everything you eat and everything you do as far as stress wise and what you put in your mouth all affects this microbiome, and it's so important for the just how healthy your health is and your gut. And interestingly too, your microbiome is what signals genes. So your microbiome is responsible for switching genes on and off. So if you have an overgrowth of inflammatory producing microbiome, they're going to upregulate your inflammatory producing gene and enzymatic pathways, versus having a microbiome that is more healthy and anti-inflammatory. They will actually signal more healing biochemical pathways. So if you've been diagnosed with things like cancer or kidney disease or blood sugar dysfunction through diabetes or insulin resistance and things like that, your microbiome actually helps signal, a healthy microbiome will help signal repair. Whereas an unhealthy microbiome, I always say it's a bit like having Homer Simpson running your factory. Do you want Elon Musk running your factory, or do you want Homer Simpson doing it? Well, if you want Homer Simpson doing it, that's the microbiome that's like candida, and they're burping, they're eating donuts, and they're all like bleh. Or you've got Elon Musk, and he's in there, and he's the right kind, and he's executive, functioning, all of that. And that's how important your microbiome is. In some ways, it's the executive function of how we execute on genes, and then genes regulate all these different biochemical processes in our body. So the microbiome is like the controller of everything going on, and that's why it's so important to have. And with kidney function, people are thinking, what does my microbiome and gut have anything to do with this? But as Emily has so eloquently mentioned, it does, and it's really, really important. Okay, so people now know that health starts in the gut, and by eating a nice high fiber diet with a variety of different fruits and vegetables, maybe using a bit of resistant starch, avoiding things like too much alcohol, antibiotics, sugar, and those sort of things that will really feed yeast and fungus. Anything else that you think people should know about their microbiome and things that they can do to make sure that they're nurturing the garden and fertilizing a nice flower bed in there, rather than overgrowing wandering trout or cape weed or something like that? There's some common weeds in Australia here.
I think all of the things that you've already mentioned, and also just remembering, particularly if you have kidney disease, that a higher protein diet is going to be making more of these uremic toxins that are going to not only make you feel pretty crappy, but also impact on your kidney function as well. And I guess as well, just to mention that there have been some probiotics that have been researched in kidney disease that have been shown to improve kidney function. So that's also something to be aware of, and hopefully I think it's an area that we'll continue to see more research in. But
anyone, off the top of your head you want to mention? I know it's something that Duncan and I spoke about as part of Hygenesis, that we will make a kidney specific probiotic that's really well researched on that. We're starting to compile that information. But any off the top of your head, if people are like, oh, I think I do want to just take a probiotic, I know it's going to have a function, but if it improves my kidney function, then I would like to take it. Any that you wanted to mention?
Yes, can I mention brand names?
Yeah, I can't see why not. We're not being sponsored by anyone here, so this is just your experience with them, so that's fine.
So there's two that I have found just through looking at the studies, and one of them I think is the one available in the US, and I might be pronouncing it wrong, but Renadil. So that's got 3 specific strains in it, and there is research specific to people with kidney disease using that combination of probiotics. And then the other one that I've been able to find, which is in Australia, is Ultrabiotic 45, which is a multi-strain product, which again has been specifically researched in people with kidney disease. There's a number of other different strains, but sometimes strains are just used in research until we actually see them come out on the market. And I think that's perhaps what the other strains have not quite made it out there yet.
And do you know those strains off the top of your head?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to print? I know they're going to have great names for people, but what are the strains that we know in research seem to have a positive impact on kidney function? And when you say positive impact, we know how herbs decrease creatinine, change bun. How are these probiotics actually affecting the kidneys as well, as the other thing I wanted to ask?
So largely reducing things like urea and creatinine and improving EGFR. So yeah, they're sort of the main markers, I guess, that they were looking at. Remembering that we need to look at the strain of probiotics. So it's not just Lactobacillus acidophilus, KB27. So the KB27 is a really important part. So it's not just Lactobacillus acidophilus that's been researched in kidney disease. Bifidobacteria, longum, KB31, Streptococcus thermophilus, KB19. They're the ones that are specifically in Renadil. But yeah, there is, if you're interested in the specific strains, there's a blog on the website where I've actually listed them. So I won't go through all of them now.
Yeah, you have. And I'll make sure that I put, I'm making a note now for when I edit this video, that we put the link to that blog in there with the kidney specific strains. So you can jump on there and have a look at that. Perfect. Anything else you want to say about the gut and the kidney and the links between there and other things that we can do to make sure that our garden is flourishing and not overgrown with weeds?
No, I think we've covered most of it. I think it's just good for people to have a better awareness of what a big impact our gut plays on the rest of our body, including our kidneys.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. It all starts in the gut. All right, Emily. Well, thank you for that great information. If you want some help or support and you've been diagnosed with kidney disease and you want someone to go through your medications, check for interactions, maybe ways that you could better do stuff, and you're following our kidney disease solution program, Emily does consult with people. She's the only trained kidney disease solution practitioner in Australia by Duncan and myself. Her details I'll put in the link below so you can book an appointment with her. If you want more information about the kidney disease solution, head over to www.kidneycoach.com and you'll find information there, and also about the supplements that Duncan and I are producing by Kaigenesis, and a kidney specific probiotic is on the list of things to do. Hopefully in the next 12 months or so we'll have that up and running. We're just working on getting our tea is the next thing that we're doing, and improving some specific stuff with some of our other formulas. So thank you again, Emily. Remember to hit subscribe. If you liked the content, make sure you give us a like. If there's any information you specifically want to hear, drop us a comment below. We definitely read them and we'd love to hear from you. You can also head over to our Kidney Coach Facebook page and join the community there. Every day there's amazing information put up by Emily. and myself. So there's some great info on there that you can go and have a look at. We'll often link back to videos that we're doing and blog posts, and it's just a wealth of information if you want to know more about all the natural things that you can do to promote and improve kidney function. So thank you for being a part of our Kidney Coach community. Be well and live well. And until next time, we'll see you then. And Emily, again, thank you again for your time.
Pleasure.